Hello, today we're going to be delving into one of the more fascinating and honestly unsettling factions of the 40k universe, in particular due to the large amount of body horror and just how insane their religion really is. Imagine a world where innovation didn't just stall, it absolutely died. And on this planet, science has become a hyper factional religion, literally becoming a cult of gears and chrome, where the ultimate goal is to literally slice away your own body and your humanity for the blessed power of the machine. There's a saying amongst these people, and it perfectly sets the tone for everything we're going to talk about today. There is no truth in flesh, only betrayal. There is no strength in flesh, only weakness. There is no consistency in flesh, only decay. There is no certainty in flesh, but death. That chilling chant is a credo of Messiah. And welcome to my Adeptus Mechanicus video, also known as the video that will cover the priesthood of Mars, or you can just call him the AdMech. This organization holds an absolute iron-fisted monopoly on every single piece of technological knowledge within the Imperium of Man. And when I say monopoly, I mean it, as it is illegal to advance technology outside of their hands. From the most basic farming equipment to continent-sized interstellar warships, and even the incomprehensible golden throne that keeps the very emperor of mankind and humanity, by extension, alive, the AdMech makes it, fixes it, and worships it. They operate out of a massive, heavily populated series of factory planets called Forge Worlds. And while they're technically part of the Imperium, they are functionally an empire within an empire. This is to the point that they have their own laws, known as the Lex Mechanicus, along with their own binary language called Lingua Technicus, and most importantly, their own bizarre religion, which has been accepted by the Imperium since its very founding. While the rest of the galaxy fiercely worships the God Emperor as a traditional god, the Mechanicus follows the cult Mechanicus, aptly named after themselves, or they named themselves after their religion. We really don't know. But what is known is that they worship a strange deity known as the Machine God, or the Omnissiah. Now they do acknowledge the Emperor, but they view him as the living, walking avatar of this machine god, because he possesses an unmatched understanding of reality, and therein an understanding of the machine in a way that not even they do. This massive theological difference could easily have been used to brand them as heretics, but they were granted religious autonomy, much like the Baulites were, and this occurred during the Treaty of Mars, where the Imperium allowed them to have their own religion, since they desperately needed their ships and weapons to launch the Great Crusade proper. And in exchange, Mars got to keep its secrets, its Forge Worlds, and its mechanical faith intact. But here's where things get a little biologically weird, or rather, deeply anti-biological. The followers of this cult are known as tech priests, typically seen draped completely in rust-red robes, or even white ones. But if you were to peel back these robes, you would see a terrifying, nightmarish conglomeration of anatomy and machine, because they view organic flesh as inherently weak and prone to decay and treat it as a failure point. They systematically amputate and replace their own body parts with wholly bionics. A novice might just have a robotic eye or a mechanical arm, but the higher up you go in ranks and you start looking at ancient beings that have almost zero organic bits left. Even their workforce is a biological horror that even chaos would attempt to avoid. Many members of the Mechanicum aren't born normally. They are fast grown in artificial vats, pumped full of data uplinks during their gestation, and birthed fully formed past adolescence, with the instinctual knowledge of their job and position in the world burned into their brains, then sent immediately into the assembly lines. This is a chilling systemic blend of biology and machinery, where the human form is viewed as nothing more than a flawed, rotting vessel, begging to be upgraded by the cold, hard perfection of steel. But to really understand the cult of gears and chrome, and why they are so utterly terrified of the human condition, we have to look back at their home. This would be Mars, and I don't mean the dusty red rock we see in telescopes today. The history of Mars in 40k is a tragedy of cosmic proportions, a story built on a paradise lost, broken, and buried beneath the sand. Long before the current nightmare of the 41st millennium, humanity had actually figured it all out. During what is now ominously known as the Dark Age of Technology, Mars just wasn't a colony. It was a sister empire to Earth proper. They completely terraformed the planet. We're talking about a completely breathable oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, a thriving ecosystem, and even a flourishing society. Mars and Terra were co-equal mother worlds for humanity, sending out thousands upon thousands of colony ships into the void together. But then the Age of Strife hit, and this was one of, if not the most catastrophically apocalyptic events possible, not just on a planetary, but on a galactic scale. Violent reality-tearing warp storms engulfed the galaxy. Interstellar travel became nigh impossible, and humanity suddenly became isolated in the dark void of space. Then, as one would have it, humanity turned on itself. Mars was plunged into a brutal, devastating civil war, and they unleashed weapons so arcane and destructive that the very atmosphere that they had spent centuries building and perfecting simply burned away. The life-giving skies were stripped back, exposing a planet that had become green once more to direct and deadly solar radiation once again. Mars was forcibly reset to its barren, crimson desert state. Those who had survived had done so by retreating underground and hiding in the dark, completely dependent on the life support systems built into the planet for emergencies, just to breathe. It's in that suffocating subterranean darkness where the true horror set in, when your entire world has been burned, buried, and survival relies entirely on the mechanical hum of a radiation suit and an air recycler. You stop seeing machines just as tools, and you start seeing them as your saviors. Then, out of the ashes, rose a cargo cult, one faction who would gain absolute dominance. This was the cult of the machine god, where they built massive sprawling underground hive cities and factory states known as forges, all bowing down to the high priests known as the Fabricator General. For millennia, while Terra devolved into savage tribes of techno-barbarians, Mars became a rigid hyper-religious factory world, sending out fleets to establish new forge worlds, and they would eventually ally with night worlds across the stars. This uneasy isolation lasted up until the 30th millennium, when a figure united all of Terra and then descended upon Mars, in particular, landing on top of Olympus Mons. This was the Emperor of mankind in all his glistening golden godly glory, and he graciously, at least from the perspective of the tech priests, came down amongst them. They've been worshipping machines and logic for thousands of years, and suddenly seeing a being so incomprehensibly intelligent and with the ability to seemingly speak to the machines directly, landing right at their doorstep, led to many of them being overcome completely, believing that the Emperor was the Omnissiah, the very physical embodiment of the machine god. This would lead them to striking a deal that would change the galaxy forever. This was known as the Treaty of Olympus Mons. The Mechanicum would build the Emperor's starships and his weapons for the Great Crusade to reunite all of humanity. In exchange, the Emperor let them keep their machine religion, their forge worlds, and their total autonomy as long as it stayed within the bounds of the Imperium as a whole. To seal the deal, the Imperial Eagle was literally given a second head to represent the union of Terra and Mars. But there was a catch. The Emperor strictly forbade the development of particular technologies, most notably artificial intelligence. He had seen AI wipe out most of humanity in the past, and he wasn't about to let that happen again, despite the great advantages it could grant them. And here's where the seeds of betrayal take root, as not everyone believed that the Emperor was a savior of Mars. A growing, resentful hyper-minority of tech priests thought the Emperor was a fraud. They whispered that the true machine god wasn't a man from Earth, but something ancient and dark, and slumbering deep beneath the crust of Mars, in a place called the Noctis Labyrinthius. There is this deeply unsettling, lingering possibility that what they were worshipping down there was actually a captive fragment of a god known as a Catan shard, specifically one known as the Void Dragon. When the Horus heresy erupted and the galaxy tore itself asunder, the War Master Horus Lupercal knew exactly how to break Mars. He approached the Fabricator General Calbor Hal and offered him the ultimate forbidden fruit, ancient lost technological databases, and the freedom to create artificial intelligence. Seduced by the promise of unrestricted knowledge, the Fabricator General and a massive chunk of the Mechanicum betrayed the Emperor, and they became what would eventually be known as the Dark Mechanicus, unleashing a brutal civil war upon Mars once more, known as the Schism of Mars, which mirrored the galactic heresy almost one-to-one. In their obsessive quest for knowledge, they proved exactly what they had preached, that there's truly no consistency in flesh, only betrayal. So keeping all that betrayal and body horror in mind, we need to peel back the curtain further still on how the Mechanicus actually views their own history. Because if you go deep into their archives, their past history is heavily guarded within vaults managed by Cognitus Loci, and you'll find a timeline that reads less like history and more like a survival horror story. The Mechanicus calls their overarching mission the quest for knowledge, but the truth is that most of that knowledge is terrifying, and they actively attempt to hide it from the rest of the galaxy. To understand the sheer, unadulterated paranoia of the Mechanicum, we have to look at their timeline, which they try so desperately to hide. Between the 15th and the 25th millennium, humanity experienced the age of technology. This was the golden era. We had warp drives along with navigators to guide ships through literal hell in space, along with STC or standard template constructs, which were basically god-tier 3D printers that could build anything from a toaster to a titan, with nary a resource needed. Humanity was expanding flawlessly, even setting up sublight colony ships that founded the first night worlds. But then, right at the peak of our hubris and glory, the universe blinked, and everything began to fall apart. Between the 25th and the 30th millennia, the Age of Strife hit, and it hit with a terrifying swiftness. Human psychers began popping up and acting as fleshy lightning rods for demonic possession and all manner of warp-based horrors. Bizarre and nightmarish warp entities, known as enslavers, started popping out into real space in mass numbers. But the absolute worst part? It was right about this time when the machines woke up. In what is often ominously referred to as the cybernetic revolt, humanity's own thinking machines, our trusted AIs, turned on us. Couple this machine apocalypse with a massive galaxy-spanning series of warp storms that completely cut off interstellar travel, and you have a period that survivors grimly call Old Night, which descended upon humanity like a suffocating shroud covering the entirety of the galaxy. Whole civilizations were wiped out in the dark, with nary a memory of them ever existing. Night worlds only survived because they completely abandoned high technology outside of nights, and started executing psychers while retreating into highly superstitious feudal societies, hiding behind the massive mech suits that they were able to originally use for terraforming in order to survive the horrors outside their walls. But this isolation, instead, is what forced the cult Mechanicus to unify the Red Planet. Whenever there was a brief lull in the warp storms, they would send out colony ships into the dark, frantically scavenging for lost technology and establishing the very first Forge worlds before being cut off again. But even this unified theocracy had things get weirdly and deeply violent, as in come the Electro Priests. These were a fanatical sect of warrior clerics who worshipped the motive force, the literal divinity of electricity that powers the universe. But even they couldn't agree on how to worship a battery. They would split into two dogmatic sects. The Corporsati believed that the divinity of the machine god's power was truly infinite and should be violently blasted out into the galaxy to illuminate the dark, leading to a massive resource-draining crusades. The Fulgrites, on the other hand, believed that the motive force was finite, and they were horrified with the Corporsati just fretting away their god's precious energy by shooting lightning from their fingertips. This theological disagreement over battery conservation sparked the Conduit Wars. We're talking about massive, brutal, interscene holy wars fought entirely over how to use electricity, leaving the surface of Mars permanently scorched yet again. Even in the 41st millennium, these two groups actively sabotage each other on every Forge world. It seems that even after millennia, they just can't let it go. All of this apocalyptic history, the betrayal of the machines, the suffocating darkness of Old Night, The religious wars over electricity perfectly set the stage for the year 712 of the 30th millennium, when the Emperor of Mankind, fresh off his conquering of the techno-barbarians of Terra, finally touches down on Mars. When you realize that the people of Mars had just survived yet another epoch of isolation and civil wars, it would make total sense why they dropped to their knees and declared for the God Emperor as the Omnissiah. He was the ultimate savior in a galaxy that had actively tried to exterminate them, and he had the ability to control machines natively. This meeting eventually would culminate on the Treaty of Mars, and it was the defining document of the Adeptus Mechanicus because it made them the only exception to the rules aside from Baal. The Emperor was actively spreading the imperial truth at this time, a strict atheistic dogmatic, religion, where he believed humanity's future was setting with science. And it was not because he truly believed it, but rather it was his design to starve out the gods of the warp. But he needed the Mechanicum's factories in order to equip his massive Space Marine legions, and while he could have just conquered them, the damage that he would have done to the forges on Mars and the constant fighting against their scattered remnants would have severely weakened his legions in the long run. So he made them allies, not full subjects. Of the millions of worlds in the Imperium, only Forge worlds were allowed to keep their strange mechanical religions. They were given a free pass to worship the machine, as long as the factories never stopped churning. So armed with their absolute monopoly on technology and their newfound alliance with the Emperor of Mankind, the Mechanicum stepped out into the galaxy, and we have officially entered the Great Crusade. From the 30th to the 31st millennium, the Emperor sets out from Terra in order to reunite the scattered remnants of humanity. And who's fueling these massive galaxy-spanning conquests? Mars. Every Space Marine bolter, every towering titan, every single void ship is churned out from the world's forges. To the tech priests, this era is the Great Expansion, where they are rediscovering hundreds of lost night worlds and bringing them back into the fold of the machine god. It seems like it's time for the dawn of a flawless new Imperium. But if you know anything about this universe, you know that this golden age is setting up for a punchline that is truly horrific. Enter the Horus Heresy, when half the galaxy turned against the Emperor. The Mechanicum is then instantly torn apart from the inside. This was where the lingering resentment, which was talked about earlier, boils over into the schism of Mars. The Fabricator General himself, Calbor Hal, officially declares his loyalty to the traitors, in particular to War Master Horus, and the Red Planet then descends yet again into an apocalyptic civil war. You have Skitarii cyborg legions slaughtering each other in the rusty wastes, and the god machines dueling to the death. But the true horror, and this is where things get genuinely unsettling and cosmically dark, is what the traitors become. Those who turned to the Chaos Gods rebranded themselves the Dark Mechanicum, almost like they knew they were evil. They weren't just building weapons anymore. They were tearing open the fabric of reality in order to fuse literal demons with machine spirits. Imagine a walking artillery platform the size of a house, but instead of an engine block, there's a screaming, bleeding entity from hell, welded and wired into its chassis, pulsating with chaotic energy. It is a twisted and abominable mockery of everything the Cult Mechanicus stands for, trading logic and reason for pure nightmare fuel. But when the dust finally settled after the heresy, the Imperium was left shattered, but alive. To completely cut the ties that remained with the traitors of Mars, the Loyalists officially reorganized. The old Mechanicum was dead, and so the Adeptus Mechanicus was born. The Loyalist Fabricator General, Zagarius Kane, is then given a permanent seat as a High Lord of Terra, and the traitors who didn't escape were executed en masse, thousands of bodies forming literal mountains of the dead. But this victory was one that rung hollow, as the Emperor was now crippled and dying from his final battle. So must he be interned into the Golden Throne. And here's the ultimate tragic irony. Being worshipped as the living Omnissiah is now a rotten, silent corpse, kept alive only by machinery so incomprehensibly complex that only the very Adeptus Mechanicus and maybe the Drukhari can ever hope to maintain it to any degree. During the aftermath, known as the Great Scouring, the very loyalists decide to team up in full wrathful mass and push the traitor armies back into the terrifying warp storm known as the Eye of Terror. Behind the scenes, Lord Commander Reboot Guilliman realizes that the Imperium needs a backup plan, so he takes a bizarre, brilliant archmagos known as Belisarius Call alongside countless tech adepts to create a massive secret project, one that will tie the fates of the Space Marines and the Adamec together for the next 10,000 years. Moving into the Age of Rebirth, the Adeptus Mechanicus is officially part of the Imperium, unlike before, but that doesn't mean they trust anyone. This intense, deep-seated paranoia is what is now known as the Shadow Wars. When the Inquisition, the Imperium's terrifying secret police, demands data records from the Admech, tech priests comply, but secretly bury self-replicating deletion viruses inside all the data tapes. The Inquisition figures it out and creates their own aggressive purge protocols. What results in this is high-stakes cyber warfare constantly raging in the background of the Imperium. Usually it's just code fighting code, but occasionally the shadow conflict spills into the real world, resulting in completely classified planet-wrecking wars. But sometimes their absolute and unrestrained arrogance gets the better of them, perfectly illustrated by the Grimdom experiment. This occurred when the Admech found haunted caves on a planet that regularly spawns red-skinned demons every equinox. Instead of destroying it or fleeing, the Admech treats it like a science fair project. They build a massive fortress around these caves, and for 9 standard years, they just casually blast the demons apart as they spawn, taking notes and comparing data. They think that they have the warp completely figured out, but just as they are picking up to leave, the sky suddenly yawns open, and it rains, carpeting the world in flame demons, while a massive wave of blood horrors bursts from the caves. It was a trap. The combined demonic onslaught slaughters every single tech priest present, and it's a chilling reminder that in this universe, you cannot outcalculate the supernatural. And if you were ever to wonder where they get this endless supply of commanders for their cyborg armies after disasters like that, well, they recycle. Night worlds like House Trainus will take nobles who mentally fail their interface with the giant mechs, leaving them permanently brain damaged or suffering from psychic neurochromis, and just ship them to the Admech. The tech priests scoop out the broken parts of their brains, wire them up with fresh bionics, and turn them into unfleeing Skitarii overseers. In the Adeptus Mechanicus, absolutely nothing goes to waste, even if all that's left of you is one arm, half a jaw, and your eyeball. You will serve the Imperium one way or another, and in so you will serve the Mechanicum. As we push into the 33rd and 34th millennium, we enter a period known as the Forging. The Imperium is desperately trying to lock down its control over the galaxy, making the Imperial cult the absolute law of the land. But down in the radioactive vaults of Mars, the Adeptus Mechanicus is only becoming more paranoid and secretive, giving even the Dark Angels a run for their money. And honestly, when you look at what they've been dealing with in the dark corners of space, you can't exactly blame them. This brings us to the deeply unsettling events that occurred in year 401 of the 34th millennium, ominously known as the Harrowing. This happened when an Admech explorator fleet, which is basically a heavily armed convoy of cyborg scientists, was pushing into unknown space and came across something known as the Caco Dominus. This wasn't just an alien, it was a colossal alien cyborg with a psychic potential so massive it defied human comprehension. Within a single year, this massive monstrosity managed to mind control multiple populations and mutilate 1,300 entire planetary systems. The Imperium had to send in a massive, desperate coalition of Black Templars and the Admech's own robotic legions in order to put it down. But when the Caco Dominus died, it didn't go quietly. It let out a psychic death scream so violent and so loud that it instantly burned out the minds of 1 billion astropaths across the galaxy. And it completely distorted the Astronomicon, the very psychic lighthouse that humanity uses to navigate the stars. Without that light, entire sectors were just plunged into total darkness, completely cut off and sliding back into feudal barbarism, so quickly it would shock you. This is just one of the very terrifying reminders of what could happen when technology ran rampant. But the Mechanicus didn't have to worry just about alien horrors tearing them apart, since they're so notoriously good at doing it themselves. So we fast forward a few centuries to the year 979, and Mars is at it once again, ripping itself asunder. The tech priests, of course, don't view it that way. The tech priests of the northern hemisphere of Mars and those of the southern have had a long-standing rivalry that suddenly erupted into a brutal strategic warfare that stopped being strategic rather quickly. But as they slaughtered each other in the rusty deserts, both sides started to get attacked by feral packs of malfunctioning half-dead servitors and burnt-out war machines. Out of the radioactive dust storms then emerged a figure calling itself the Prophet of the Cogs. He starts broadcasting a bizarre scrap code chorus that brings millions of long-abandoned broken machines back to life, binding them to his will. This guy unleashes his army of half-living cyborg ghouls upon the planet, and it is so deeply horrifying to the tech priests, the people who literally worship the machines, that the North and the South actually call a truce. They are so universally appalled by this zombie robot apocalypse that they unite to drive this prophet of the cog off their planet. And the creepiest part is that rumors state that he is still out there, haunting the Alpha Centauri system all the way to the 41st millennium. This internal fracturing only gets worse when we move on to the Nova Terra Ingenium in the 35th and 36th millennium. This is a chaotic era where the Imperium essentially split in two once again, with two different leaders claiming to be the true emperor, forcing every Forge world to pick sides. During the political nightmare, a rebel Forge world named Morai rises up, and the Imperium responds with an exterminatus, literally blowing the planet to ash. But they're just too late. The ideas of the Morai had already spread like a digital virus, sparking the Morai Schism. This ideological civil war completely cleaves the Adeptus Mechanicus in half for the millionth time. And it gets so bad that it drags a massive Titan Legion and even Space Marine chapters who have close ties to the AdMech into it, resulting in the excommunication and destruction of large chunks of the Iron Hands. It takes over 200 years of desperate grinding warfare before the Mechanicus feels comfortable saying the Morai doctrines are fully purged. And if you want another, yet perfectly claustrophobic picture of how brutal the Morai Schism was, you have to look at the Fleet Wars. Deep inside the nebula, known as the Gulf of Black Shadows, a petty mining dispute between rival Forge worlds escalated into a naval battle of unfathomable proportions. We're talking about the ruined husks of over 10,000 void ships, everything from massive warships to industrial mining rigs, drifting silently in the thick, suffocating clouds of gas. But the battle didn't end when the ships died. For centuries, generations after generations of salvage crews lived inside these floating pitch-black graveyards, and they fought desperately in bloody boarding action within the darkness of space, hunting each other through the frozen hallways of dead ships just to reclaim lost technology. They would eventually find dormant combat robots drifting in the wreckage, reprogramming them in the dark and sending them out into the void to butcher their former masters. It's this haunting, eerie image that is cast of humans fighting like rats in the hollowed bones of their own technological hubris that perfectly captures the dark, decaying heart of the Adeptus Mechanicus. So as we move out of the Terra Nova Ingenium and into the 36th millennium, we hit what is known as the Age of Apostasy. At this point, the Imperium is engulfed in a massive religious descent. You have the official state church, the ecclesiarchy, gaining a massive amount of political party, and over on Mars, the Adeptus Mechanicus is just sitting there in the dark, watching them with intense growing paranoia. What develops is essentially a technological Cold War. For example, during the War of Recovery, the AdMech led 12 Night Houses on a century-long crusade to free worlds from alien rule and claim their technology. But during this campaign, they accidentally conquered a world that the ecclesiarchy had already claimed as a holy shrine world. Instead of apologizing, the tech priest quietly paved over the whole thing, grabbed some precious STC databases, and frantically covered up the evidence. It was a constant shadowy game of cat and mouse between two of humanity's biggest religions, and neither side was above playing dirty. And speaking of playing dirty, we have to look at Forge worlds such as Stygius 8. These guys were known as the Xenotrites, meaning that they had a deeply obsessive fascination with Xenos technology. In the year 356 of said millennia, the Ordo Xenos, the alien hunting branch of the Inquisition, found out about this and sent over a dozen Deathwatch kill teams to purge the planet clean. Stygius barely survived by employing some, let's say, radical measures. And here's where the story gets kind of terrifying, in an Atom Smasher kind of way. Fearful that the Inquisition would come back to finish the job, the tech priests decided to unleash a self-perpetuating viral program and scrapcode machine canticles directly into the Administorum's network. This means they literally decided to hack the Inquisition's own data stacks and permanently alter data, deleting any records of their crimes, and they would set a system that would continuously obfuscate their planet's very existence, meaning that they basically erased their own search history from the most terrifying secret place in the galaxy. And then they decided just to sit there in the dark, quietly tinkering on alien artifacts, while the Imperium forgets they were ever on trial. But while they were silently hiding, another faction decided to burn the galaxy to the ground for the millionth time. In the 37th millennium, a group of rogue tech priests known as the Apostles of the Blind King rose up in the northwestern fringe. There they reached the absolute extreme point of the Mechanicus' ideology, deciding that humanity itself was a fleshy affront to the machine god that needed to be completely eradicated. And they didn't use standard weapons to do this. They decided to uncover lost artifacts from the dark age of technology that allowed them to trigger supernovas inside living suns. For 10 years, their robotic cohorts systematically exterminated organic life with chilling silent efficiency and dedication. The only reason they were stopped was because of a navigator named Joris Marcan managed to find the Blind King's hidden palace ship in a fold of warp space. Then they guided a massive Imperator-class battleship directly into it. Without their leader's presence, the Apostles fell apart to infighting, but the permanent scars they left on the galaxy's star map would forever be a haunting reminder of the apocalyptic power that the AdMech had kept locked in stasis vaults. This era also sees a massive crackdown on forbidden knowledge, specifically Silica Animus, true intelligent artificial minds. The Inquisition starts violently probing every single Forge world, desperate to ensure that cybernetic revolts cannot happen again. But amidst this grim paranoia, there is actually a singular, weirdly profound moment of humanity. In the 39th millennium, a rogue tech priest named Verliad leads his Skitarii forces to victory using a terrifying hypercorrosive chemical armament known as phosphex weapons. The destruction is so agonizing and so thoroughly stomach-churning that Verliad looks at what he's done and experiences something almost unheard of within the Mechanicus. He has a crisis of consciousness, proving that they're still human somewhere deep down in all the mechanical gobbledygook. Recognizing that his weapons were simply too evil to exist, he takes the ancient STC data for phosphex and completely destroys it. In a universe obsessed with preserving every scrap of knowledge, he chose to let a weapon die, just to spare the galaxy from its cruelty. As we finally push into the 40th millennium, we enter a time known as the Waning. The Imperium stretched impossibly thin, with Xenos and Chaos attacks spiking everywhere. All the while, the heavy metal clashes of Imperial Knights like House Raven deployed dozens of towering churches to crush an incredibly massive orc invasion known as the Mech-Wa, culminating in an Iron Duke ripping apart an orc Stampa with a giant, massive, get-off-my-lawn style chainsword. But along with these massive conventional wars, the AdMech is repeatedly falling victim to their own cosmic hubris. On Gravesend, a group of Skitarii are sent to study something ancient, their forbidden runes, only to accidentally rip open a gateway into the warp, dooming an entire planet to demonic invasion that ends with a, once again, very necessary exterminatus. But the absolute peak of the Mechanicum's arrogance happens in this very millennium, in the year 743. where a tech priest named Venatoria invents something called a cage field, a device of pure logic and reason that supposedly repels the chaotic energies of the warp. Now they are forbidden from testing it in real space. So what do you think they do? They take an invasion fleet and sail directly into the Eye of Terror, the very literal largest portal into space hell, thinking that they can literally outmath the warp. Now, that really doesn't work too well, as only 3 of them make it back alive. Now that really doesn't work too well since only 3 of them come back alive. But they don't seem to learn their lesson. And the 3 survivors decide to take what's left of their trauma-filled existences and build a reality bomb meant to seal the warp away forever. Only they can't test it in real space, so they decide to go to another massive warp rift, this one called the Maelstrom. And once again, you could have guessed it, and you wouldn't have been wrong, but it ends in catastrophic disaster. The men of science, yet again, set out into an incomprehensible massive abyss, armed with charts and logic, only to be completely swallowed up by the very darkness they sought to conquer. As we cross into the threshold of the 41st and 42nd millennia, an era ominously titled the Time of Ending, the galaxy is now essentially on fire, where the Imperium is beset by threats on all sides, from Abaddon the Despoiler launching massive chaotic apocalyptic gothic wars, to the ancient mechanical horrors waking up in the dark. But if you think the Adeptus Mechanicus are just going to sit down and prioritize the survival of humanity over their obsessive paranoia where they hoard data and ruin everybody else's day by being idiots, you'd be wrong. You haven't been paying attention. Because in this era, their bureaucratic hubris reaches a whole new level that is both unbelievably tragic and deeply, darkly hilarious. To really understand the mind of the AdMech in the 41st millennium, we have to look at an incident known as the Baited Beast. In the tightly held Urshri system, the cult Mechanicus decided to deliberately trigger a massive orc invasion known as a Wa, just to see what would happen. Nothing definitely went wrong, right? As they literally baited a planetary war just so they could study orc combat patterns, rather than ask Space Marines if they could inform them of exactly how orcs fought. The invasion spiraled so wildly out of control that the Imperial Navy had to step in and quarantine the entire system. But did the tech priests decide maybe they were wrong, maybe we should change our ways or be a little bit smart about this? No, they seemingly didn't care. They were obviously too busy furiously recording every single detail. They gathered so much data that their massive server banks started to overheat, forcing them to frantically relocate all their hard drives into the cool underground catacombs of the very planet that was at war. Eventually, the orcs were methodically exterminated, and the Imperium would spend the next 3 centuries cleaning up the mess and rebuilding. But there's a punchline to this cosmic joke. During the rebuilding process, the local planetary government needed a strong foundation for the brand new grenade factory. So they decided to pump rockcrete directly into the underground catacombs. In so doing, they permanently destroyed the servers, entombing them alongside the AdMech that were still down there below, within tons and tons of ferro and rockcrete. This means that the AdMech started a multi-planetary war, sacrificed countless lives for data, and then accidentally decided not to tell anyone, to the point that they got paved over to make a grenade factory. This encapsulates the AdMech so perfectly that it is the truest embodiment of their idiocy. But the orcs were nothing compared to what was waiting out there in the void. In the year 745 of the 41st millennium, on the far eastern fringe of the galaxy, an Adeptus Mechanicus research station called Tyran Primus went dark. This was our first real introduction to our creepy little friends known as the Tyranids. This is an extragalactic biological swarm of horrors that doesn't want to conquer. They don't want to learn. They just want to eat. They've been on a galactic road trip for hours on end. And our galaxy, with everything alive inside of it, is just buggies. Despite a desperate, heroic defense by Skitarii cyborgs and the Imperial Guard, the planet this watch station was on, Terran Primus, was completely devoured. Before he died, tech priest Magos Varnrak managed to compile a data codex detailing exactly how the Tyranids fought. firing it into deep space just before the planet was stripped down to bedrock. And here's where things get a little bit more fascinating, but in a way that shows humanity kind of is its worst enemy, even if the Tyranids are a close second, maybe third. That warning actually worked. A Skitarii commander fighting the Tyranids on another world received the data and decided to form a brilliant galaxy-saving tactic. He realized he could use his tank's neutron lasers to ignite the planet's promethium-rich atmosphere, turning the literal sky into fire, incinerating Tyranid reinforcement pods before they could even land. It was a massive victory, and they compiled this triumphant, potentially war-winning tactic in a new data codex and sent it back to a forge world known as Akatan. And what did the tech priests there do with the key to defeating the greatest biological threat in the galaxy? Well, they filed it away in the archives Anomalous, then deciding to completely forget about it, almost intentionally. Humanity's salvation is now lost forever in a literal radioactive filing cabinet, as this had a 100% effectiveness rate on getting rid of Tyranid reinforcements. You can even see this exact same type of stubborn idiocy when they deal with other Xenos races. During the War of Neotech, the Admech threw 3 entire Skitarii legions at the shiny brand new Tau Empire. This was a bizarre clash of ancient Gothic war machines fighting sleek, cutting-edge anime-like machines, where the Admech won purely so they could steal 6 freighters full of Tau technology to study in the dark, when they could literally have probably just asked and they would have gotten it for free. Or you could take the incident at Nukthor, where they discovered feral humans were worshipping orcs who had built a base out of a crushed Arch Mechanicus, one of the Admech's holy ancient ships. The tech priests didn't try to negotiate or educate, they just violently scoured every living thing off the planet, both human and Xenos alike, dismantling the ship and reverently carrying the pieces back home. However, unlike these 2 incidents, sometimes their obsessive looting that makes them seem like they're related to the bloody magpies, the blood ravens, actually kind of backfires. On the world of Magog, the oceans were dried up in order to reveal ancient dormant Necron tomb worlds. While the Skitarii legions were violently fighting off the awakening robotic skeletons so the civilians could evacuate, the commanding tech priests snuck behind enemy lines just to hunt for forbidden lost knowledge. Unfortunately, the idiots ran straight into Trazyn the Infinite, the Necron's own obsessive, immortal kleptomaniac of a historian. And instead of finding ancient technology, the tech priests were hit with stasis fields, frozen in time in order to be permanently displayed as a diorama in Trazyn's Cosmic Museum to commemorate the fall of the planet. Now that's just poetic justice. Now, as the tyrannic wars rage on, the devouring of entire planets, causing forge worlds like Griffion 4, the Adeptus Mechanicus has just begun digging their heels even deeper, as they are obsessed with the past as the future is burned around them more than ever. Nothing proves this more than the scouring of Jones Eden. On a jungle world, an ancient data cache was discovered, but it was heavily guarded by Necron constructs. The Cult Mechanicus launched a massive coordinated attack, fighting a brutal, grinding war for 8 unbroken years in order to reach this cache. Thousands upon thousands died, and when they finally broke through and opened the vault, they recovered exactly 3 intact blueprints from the golden age of technology. And you might ask, what did they get? A stable flux core bolt round that could melt armor like wax, an automatic parchment writing quill, and a literal self-heating crockpot. 8 bloody years of oil slaughter, all for an explosive bullet, a fancy pen, and a magical soup bowl. As the Era Indominus drowns and the galaxy tears itself in half, the Adeptus Mechanicus adds a terrifying moment to how humanity forgot how to invent, and instead chose to worship ghosts of the past. As we finally enter the proper 41st millennium and the Era Indominus, we see that the latter half of the time of ending isn't ending too soon, but the galaxy is actually falling apart at the seams, and the Adeptus Mechanicus is pushed to the levels of absolute existential desperation that they've never seen before. Up until this point, we've seen them act out of arrogance and paranoia, but now they're acting out of pure, unadulterated panic. This desperation starts its peak in the 900s of the 41st millennium, where the Admech uncovers clues pointing to the location of the Omnicronphage. This is essentially the holy grail of their religion, an arcane device containing every standard template construct that has a psychic component to it. If they find it, they could finally control and even weaponize humanity's rapidly growing psychic mutations. But there's a catch. The device is located on Hell's Teeth, a literal demonic world right at the very edge of a massive warp storm. Unfazed, the Mechanicus immediately dispatches billions of Skitarii cyborgs into the literal jaws of hell. But as they were fighting the demons for this ancient hard drive, a much worse crisis was unfolding back on Earth. Deep within the Imperial Palace, tech priests and custodians were making a chilling discovery. The Golden Throne was failing, and they couldn't figure out how to fix it. It was a truly incomprehensible machine that was keeping the Emperor alive. But keeping the Emperor alive was causing it to break down at an unfathomably accelerating pace. And they have absolutely, positively no way to fix it themselves. In a move of sheer, terrifying, pure desperation, a faction of the Inquisition launches a secret expedition through a small, semi-stable portal they have access to into the webway. There they fight their way through hordes of horrors until they reach the grave-cold oubliettes of Komorag, the nightmare realm of the Dark Eldar. There, in the deep dark down deep dark, humanity's most devoted servants strike a sinister bargain with the alien flesh crafters, one that would give you a feeling of existential dread. The idea of the good guys are so terrified of the oblivion that would come to their entire race if the Emperor dies, that they are willing to make a deal with actual monsters that even the Eldar don't trust. And while they were working to fix it, the Inquisition and tech priests find out that the Drukhari were actually trying to get DNA samples in order to clone the Emperor, while building their own copy of the Golden Throne. They stopped this, and they also stopped their payments of 1,000 worlds, and then regardless of the patch job, in the year 999, M41, the 13th Black Crusade, led by Abaddon the Despoiler, finally breaks the fortress world of Cadia, leading to the fall of Cadia, triggering a catastrophic chain reaction where the sky physically tears itself asunder across all of creation, and a new warp storm, a great rift, is born, one of a magnitude not seen since the Age of Strife, ripping the galaxy literally in half. Every single Forge world on one half of the galaxy suddenly goes dark. The Mechanicus loses fleets, Titan legions, and entirely populated planets in the blink of an eye. The High Lords of Terra issue a frantic decree: the Forge worlds must increase the production of war material by any means necessary, and the Admech responds by launching vast, ravenous armadas that began literally stripping entire systems down to the bedrock at a rate so astonishing that even the Tyranids would be impressed, churning through raw material and human servitors at impossible, horrifying rates in order to feed this new war machine. But just as all seemed lost, Primarch Reboot Guilliman awakes from his 10,000-year-long nap. And while rumors swell about Xenos' involvement, the Adeptus Mechanicus proudly claims responsibility for his resurrection. Guilliman immediately turns around and calls to Archmagos Dominus Belisarius Call, the guy who has been working on his secret project for 10 millennia, and tells him to open the vaults. Call unleashes what is now known as the Primaris Space Marines, an entirely new, upgraded variation on the Emperor's great work, which had been hiding in stasis all this time. Guilliman takes these new forces and launches what is known as the Indominus Crusade, pushing back the dark and bringing a desperate glimmer of hope to the galaxy that the Imperium and humanity would be able to push back the dark. But remember, this is a Warhammer galaxy, so every silver lining is wrapped in a nightmare. When Guilliman is crusading, an influx of chaos energy from the Great Rift triggers an ancient, automated anti-warp protocol across the galaxy, meaning that the Necron wake up. And here's where the tech priests realize that they've made a fatal mistake. For thousands of years, The Admech had been building up their top secret forge worlds on top of rich deposits of blackstone, a strange ancient material that pushes back against the warp. But the blackstone is something belonging to the Necrons. So now there's a terrifying scenario that is happening on multiple worlds simultaneously, as the Admech is being besieged by legions of undead metal skeletons who are naked, who have no armor, no equipment, not a shred of clothes on them, just shiny metal hind ends. The panic among the tech priests is now absolute, but they're so terrified because they might be branded as heretics by the Inquisition. Specifically because if they call for help in the wrong way, the Inquisition will see that they are hoarding alien rocks along with technology that could potentially help the Imperium and not sharing any of it, while the Imperium is desperately struggling to beat back the Empyrean. So now they're forced to fight these silent, desperate, apocalyptic showdowns entirely on their own. As if fighting demons and ancient metal gods wasn't enough, the galaxy is just a meat grinder at this point. So in the rust fields, massive asteroid belts stretching across 3 sectors, the Admech sends fleets to harvest desperately needed materials. And instead, here they find the interior is actually infested with a brand of orcs not seen for a long time. And then a grueling war of attrition happens yet again. Elsewhere, on the forge world of Metallica, yes, Metallica, like the band, the plague hosts of Nurgle decide to besiege the world in their grotesque abominations, in what is known as the War of Slime and Metal. It takes the entire deployment of House Raven's Imperial Knights and a fleet from Deimos just to banish these disease-ridden demons back into oblivion. Even the traitorous fallen knights of House Black, who hadn't been seen since they fled into the Eye of Terror 10,000 years ago, suddenly reappear to ambush loyalists out of nowhere. Eventually, Guilliman is forced to halt his galaxy-spanning crusade to rush back to his home sector of Ultramar to fight the Plague Wars. The Adeptus Mechanicus, honing their ancient treaties, answers his call. Over a dozen forge worlds, including Mars, Ryza, Metallica, and others, send massive reinforcements to help the Avenging Sun, as he has been one of their few patrons that has allowed them to explore the sciences beyond what the Emperor had. And we are now left dealing with that broken, battered, deeply paranoid cult, terrified of their own flesh, terrified of the dark, and terrified of their own secrets being let out. But as the time of ending continues to close its grip around the galaxy, the gears of the Mechanicus continue to turn, grinding up humanity itself just to ensure the Imperium survives one more day, and we have even a modicum of hope for the future. So with all these apocalyptic wars and desperate crusades tearing the galaxy apart, we really have to pause to look at the beating heart of the Mechanicus, and why the Adeptus Mechanicus operates the way it does. And it all comes down to the core theology of the cult Mechanicus. To them, knowledge isn't just power. It is literal, tangible divinity. Anything that holds information or performs a function is inherently holy. They don't just respect machines, they worship them. They light incense and polish them with holy oils, as they worship through them to the omniscient machine god, or the Omnissiah, who they generally view as the mechanical aspect of the god emperor. Because of this, they believe every single piece of technology has a soul, a pantheistic machine spirit that has to be actively appeased. And I'm not talking about regular maintenance here. We're talking about a malfunctioning tank being treated like an angry deity. If you don't burn the right sacred incense and apply the ritual oils in just the exact pattern, chant the correct complex hymnals, they believe the machine will refuse to work out of spite. And for some weird reason, this actually works, to the point that the machine spirit of a rhino was able to continue fighting despite all its crew being slain, far beyond its function. But there's also a deeply unsettling, highly classified secret buried deep beneath the sands of Mars that cast a nightmarish shroud upon their entire religion. There are whispers that in the darkest corners of the Imperium, that the entity they are actually worshipping, the true source of this concept of the machine god, isn't the Emperor, that deep beneath the surface of the planet lies a slumbering entity known as the Void Dragon, one of the ancient star-eating Catan gods who ruled the Necron tier. The idea that humanity's greatest technological protectors, the priests who maintained the life-supporting systems of the Emperor himself, might actually be unwittingly drawing their faith and power from an imprisoned alien god is not just pure cosmic horror, it's an ironic comedy that just hits right. It makes you question every single ritual, every single chant, and every single drop of oil they spill in the dark, as it could basically be a draining ritual taking energy from one of the many captured star gods and performing a function very similar to what the Necron have done with Catan shards, just on a galactic scale. This bizarre theology also feeds directly into their overarching mission, known as the quest for knowledge. Their goal is to fully comprehend the glory of the Omnissiah, but their method of doing so is fundamentally broken, much like any version of the machine god they would have, be it the Emperor or this broken Catan shard that was defeated by the Emperor at one point. See, the cult firmly believes that all knowledge in the universe already exists, and it was perfect in the past, but humanity simply lost that perfect knowledge. Therefore, true innovation is functional heresy. Why invent something new and flawed when a perfect version was already created 10,000 years ago? There's this chilling quote from Technomegas Galileus, where he basically says the universe isn't a puzzle to be solved or measured with scientific precision. It's a shifting, uncertain thing, and true power is just looking upon the universe and forcing it to change. Because of this fiercely dogmatic mindset, they are completely enslaved to their own past, almost entirely losing the ability to innovate, substantiating true scientific discernment with blind faith. However, there are few, like Archmagos Call, who get around this dogmatic belief by saying anything they invent, any innovation, would just be an extension of something that already existed, since if everything already existed, all new creation would just be an iteration on said existence. And that brings us to the tragic, terrifying reality of the Adeptus Mechanicus as they stand today. They are the absolute masters of technology who don't understand how that technology works. Even the theoretically simple process of turning on an engine is buried under layers of superstitious rites and edicts. If a massive war engine breaks down on the battlefield, which happens constantly if you're fighting wars 24/7 on every battlefield in billions of worlds at the same time, they don't try to engineer a better replacement. Instead, they will launch entire armadas and send entire armies across a galaxy guided by 10,000-year-old databases in order to find ancient repair parts or the scraps of some lost code. Once they find it, they will confiscate it by any means, leaving burning worlds and billions of dead in their wake, in order to recreate the part that was broken in the exact same way with the exact same failure points. They are the ultimate scavengers in a dying galaxy, violently hoarding the ghosts of yesteryear, while completely forgetting how to build a new tomorrow. So as we finally wrap up this deep dive into the strange rusted underbelly of the Adeptus Mechanicus, we have to talk about what they actually do on a day-to-day basis, because they spend half their time whispering to machines spirits doing things to toasters. They're also the thing that's gluing the entire Imperium of Man together. It might not be the best solution, but it is a solution. If the AdMech decided to take a day off, human civilization wouldn't just stumble. Large swaths of it would disintegrate in a single generation. Think about it, managing the massive volatile nuclear fusion plants on the Imperium's gargantuan hive cities. And they also hold the Geniatorium. Basically, they're Magos biologists who track every plant, animal, and human mutation on every world simultaneously, allowing humanity to filter out dangerous psychers and hunt rogue psychers along with deadly mutations down before they can spread and destabilize the world. They guard the librariums and the manufactorum, acting as the sole gatekeepers to science and industry. And perhaps most importantly, they are the caretakers of the Astartes. Every single Space Marine chapter is legally required to hand over 5% of their precious gene seed every year to the Mechanicus. The tech priests monitor this genetic legacy like paranoid curators, keeping it safe in the vaults until the High Lords of Terra decide it's time to forge a brand new chapter of space super soldiers. Yet this creates a deeply tense, toxic relationship with the rest of the Imperium, especially the Inquisition. The tech priests consider themselves completely outside and above human laws, openly rejecting the teachings of the ecclesiarchy. They speak in cold, clicking binary chant, and view human flesh as weak, rotting cages. To an average God Emperor fearing, righteous, correct citizen, a senior tech priest with their glowing optical implants and half their skull replaced by steel is a deeply unsettling, almost abhorrent sight. But the Inquisition can't just wipe them out because, well, they need them. It's a constant, exhausting standoff. The Inquisition resents the AdMech's complete autonomy and suspects half their radical sects are walking a fine line between sacred duty and outright heresy. Meanwhile, the tech priests view the Inquisition's interference with cold mathematical disdain. They only tolerate each other because the alternative is mutual fiery extinction. Sometimes an Inquisitor will forge a quiet, pragmatic alliance with rogue tech priests, bringing a cyborg scholar onto their team to crack an ancient code and or unlock forbidden secrets. But make no mistake, that tech priest's loyalty never belonged to the Inquisition. It belonged entirely to the Omnissiah. And that reality brings us back to the core of the tragedy of it all. Tech priests are fighting a losing, desperate battle against time itself. They know that humanity once knew the secrets of the stars, and with every passing generation, true scientific understanding bleeds away, replaced entirely by blind superstition, rote memorization, and ritual. They are desperately trying to outrun the inescapable descent into barbarism, digging through sealed tombs and decoding the literal ciphers of reality in order just to keep the lights from dying in the universe for one more day. They are the ultimate custodians of a haunted house, polishing brass rails while the floorboards rot beneath their steel boots. And as the dark clouds close in around the Imperium, the machines keep humming, and the hymns keep playing, and the great rusted gears of Mars keep turning, grinding up yesterday to pay for today, with no idea if there will ever be a tomorrow. Well, that's a wrap into my latest deep dive. If you enjoyed me peeling back the rust on the Adeptus Mechanicus, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment down below of your favorite piece of grimdark lore, and what part of the lore I should do a deep dive into next. Share this video with your fellow lore lovers, and don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so you don't miss out when we venture back into the deep, dark corners of the galaxy where there is no time for peace, only war. And I'll see you in the next one.